I knew exactly how long the pause would last after the sentence. I'm gonna need that report by Thursday. 3 seconds. Enough time for Brian to look around the table like he'd just delivered a TED Talk instead of asking for something I'd already finished last Friday. The other project leads scribbled notes like toddlers playing Office. Me? I just sipped my coffee and watched the sugar substitute swirl like a tiny storm in my cup. This was Fulbright Ridge, a defense contractor so deeply entangled with federal procurement, it practically had a seat at the Senate table. And for the past 7 years, I was the one threading that tangle tighter. You didn't see my face in shareholder updates. You didn't hear my voice on quarterly calls. But if a contract hit before deadline, under budget, or with language so ironclad even government lawyers winced, that was me. I was the quiet architect, the one who sat 3 chairs from the head of the table and never raised her voice, who let the junior VPs showboat while I quietly adjusted the margins of the only spreadsheet that mattered. Because while they bragged about efficiency, I was the one who buried Clause 72D in the middle of a contract addendum 3 years ago, a clause no one bothered to read because I didn't make noise about it, just like I didn't make noise about the $4 million retention bonus I negotiated to trigger at 11:59 p.m. on December 15th. I wasn't greedy, I just wanted what I earned. By the way, before we go any deeper, do me one small favor. If you're enjoying this, hit that subscribe button and drop a like. It takes a second, but it helps us more than you think. Really keeps the team going. Now, back to it. The thing about power is that it's most useful when it's invisible. My job wasn't flashy, senior procurement strategy manager, which is just government speak for the person who makes sure you don't land in jail for ordering $200K of ghost software from your brother-in-law's startup. But I'd made that title mean something. I embedded controls, flagged high-risk vendors, redesigned bidding language to outmaneuver bigger firms without them noticing. I could calculate compliance timelines in my head and recite the subcontractor clauses from memory. I once spotted a discrepancy in an Army logistics proposal that would have triggered a federal audit. Brian never noticed. But Helen from legal bought me lunch and whispered, "You're the only reason this place hasn't collapsed under its own bullshit." I didn't need flowers for that, or a plaque. I just wanted my work to hold. So when our board approved a 5-year federal renewal worth $190 million, I didn't smile in the photos or give a speech. But I was the one who designed the proposal format, the one who lobbied for dual source eligibility wording, the one who made damn sure that if this place tried to shove me out before my milestone, before that bonus was legally mine, they'd pay, in cash. It was all locked in, not just the clause, but the time, the trigger, the damages. I knew Fulbright's accounting systems better than their CFO did. I'd seen how bonuses got lost in transition restructures and fiscal timing gaps. I saw what happened to the last woman who trusted HR's handshake. So I played the long game. Said yes when I needed to, stayed late when it counted, trained Brian's interns while he took strategy calls from hotel bars. I didn't protest when they skipped me in org charts. I didn't object when Brian started sitting at the head of meetings I used to run. Let him pretend his swagger built the pipeline I'd spent years laying like fiber optic cable beneath his feet. I could feel it coming, though. The change in tone, the sudden optimization review memos. The meetings I was left off of, the way Brian smirked when he said legacy employees. He thought I was furniture, and I was fine with that, because the difference between furniture and foundation is what happens when you try to remove it. Brian Colfax came in like a man who thought his own cologne was more important than the air we breathed. He had that freshly promoted shine, mid-30s, tailored shirts too tight in the arms to look like he lifted, probably did curls before staff meetings. He liked to start sentences with, "back when I ran my startup," which was code for that app he built in college to find vape shops near you. It flopped in 8 months, but you'd think he sold it to NASA the way he carried himself. The first time he walked into a leadership sink, he walked past my chair like I was a lamp. Didn't nod. Didn't glance. Just dropped his leather folder on the table, pulled out his iPad, and cleared his throat like we were all his interns. "We've got to tighten the belt," he said. "Too many people on this floor still think tenure equals relevance." I stared at my notes. 3 red flags in 1 sentence. To Brian, the spreadsheet was God, but only the top rows where his name lived. Anything beyond row 25 was dead weight. He didn't understand procurement strategy because it didn't fit on a slide deck. He wanted flash, case studies, dashboard candy, not the actual legal bones that held Fulbright Ridge together. He never once asked how we secured vendor exclusivity for DLA contracts or why our bid ratios were 16% higher than industry average. But he did ask why we still had so many line items tied to people from the last regime. Regime. That was his word. Like he'd waltzed into a battlefield with a whiteboard and a minor in change management. He made a comment in one all hands, half smirk, half sermon, that stuck with me. I've always believed you can't build the future using the rusted scaffolding of the past, he said, pacing with his little wireless clicker. We've got some cleanup to do before the new year. Time to sharpen the axe. And that's when I felt it. Not panic, just a cold electric flicker down the back of my neck. I'd seen this play before. I'd written risk mitigation plans for guys like Brian, the ones who think layoffs are leadership, who gut infrastructure because they don't understand it, who slice through the sinew of an organization and wonder why the limbs don't move anymore. I went back to my desk that day and opened the full PDF of my contract renewal, not the summary version finance uses, the real one. 47 pages, redlined by me, reviewed by outside counsel. The clause was still there. Clause 72D, not buried, not hidden, just quiet. Termination within 48 hours of a pre-scheduled contractual milestone triggers full payment of all due bonuses and compensations. If unpaid by the deadline, a 3x liquidated damages penalty applies. Not optional, not contestable. Standard arbitration waiver, signed by 2 C-levels, dated, notarized. Brian had never seen it. HR had never read it. Legal had flagged it once back in 2020, but I added language to make it standard retention language in procurement sectors. It passed. No one argued, because no one thought I was dangerous. Still, I didn't relax. I started taking notes, dates, times, tone of voice in meetings, who was CC'd. I exported my own copies of internal approvals tied to the federal renewal. I knew they'd eventually forget who wrote the compliance matrix, but I had the metadata, and if it came to it, I'd let the emails talk. I watched Brian start skipping my reports, sending interns to meetings I used to lead, the same interns I trained who'd whisper, "I don't know how he talks to you like that," before sprinting off to build another color-coded Gantt chart that didn't mean anything. Every time I heard his voice down the hallway, I got a little quieter. Not because I was scared, but because storms don't make noise before they hit. They just shift the pressure, and I was watching the barometer drop, fast. The email subject line just read, "Quick chat, 10 a.m., no punctuation, no context." That's the corporate equivalent of a pistol being cocked off-screen. I clicked it. Brian's assistant, probably still riding high on her first Slack integration, had booked me for a meeting in conference room B, glass walls. No blinds, of course. I didn't bother bringing my laptop, just took a manila folder from my drawer, one I'd kept untouched for 6 years, and walked down the hallway like I'd been asked to refill the printer paper. Nobody looked up. Brian was already inside, seated like he was about to conduct an exit interview for a guy who didn't know he was dead yet. He didn't even gesture for me to sit. "Thanks for making time," he said, all fake casual. His sleeves were rolled up like he'd just come from fixing the company's broken soul. I stood, back straight, folder in hand. He folded his hands and tried to soften his tone like that would make him less of a cliché. "Look, I won't dance around it. We're restructuring the ops leadership model, and unfortunately your role has been impacted." I checked the clock on the wall. 10:03 a.m., December 14th. I said nothing. He leaned forward like this was hard for him. "It's not personal. You've been with Fulbright a long time, and we appreciate your contributions, but we're moving in a more agile direction." "Agile," I repeated finally, the only word I gave him. He smiled, relieved I wasn't crying. He'd probably rehearsed this in the mirror with different reactions. Thought maybe I'd scream, plead, ask for a transition period, something to give him the high ground. But I just looked at the folder in my hand. He kept going, stumbling now. "You'll be getting the standard severance package. HR will reach out with next steps. Please return your laptop by end of day." I opened the folder, not for him, just to check the document inside. One sheet of paper. My original signed counteroffer from 2020, initialed by me, countersigned by our former CFO, and one line highlighted in blue. Clause 72D, still crisp, still enforceable. I closed the folder. I assume you're processing, he said. I get it. These things are never easy. I nodded once. Just once. Then I turned, opened the glass door, and walked back into the hallway. The admin looked up from her screen. I smiled. Conference room's all yours. My desk was 2 corridors down. I didn't stop there, either. Just grabbed my coat, ignored the blinking notification light on my phone, and walked out through the lobby like I was going to grab a sandwich. No tears. No scene. Not because I wasn't angry. Not because I wasn't hurt. But because people like Brian only understand control, and nothing terrifies control freaks more than a quiet exit. He thought he'd cut off my payday with 15 hours to spare. Thought he'd save the company $4 million and look like a cost-slaying hero at the next board meeting. He didn't realize he'd just activated a clause that would cost them 3 times that. I didn't need to explain anything to him. I'd already written it down 3 years ago. All I had to do now was wait. I walked into my kitchen like it was any other Thursday, set my folder on the counter, poured myself a coffee I didn't need. The house was quiet, save for the low hum of the fridge and the ticking reminder that every second Brian thought he was ahead. He was actually sprinting toward a wall he couldn't see. I booted up the laptop I never used for company work. Encrypted, air-gapped, loaded only with my own records, backups, and what HR liked to call paranoid redundancy. But paranoia is just foresight that proves itself later. I opened the contract file. Not the polished HR copy they archive, but the real one. The one I annotated line by line with outside counsel before signing. Revised December 2020, during that chaotic end-of-year procurement overhaul when everyone else was fighting over holiday PTO. I'd kept my head down, like always. Let them think I was just steady. Let legal skim the changes while I quietly rebuilt my section from the ground up. Page 39, Clause 72D, I'd named it something innocuous. Milestone Continuity Provision. Nothing that would ping alarms. And it sat nested under the Executive Compensation and Retention Appendix. Just another clause in a sea of HR filler, but it was the fuse. And Brian, bless his MBA-toting heart, had just lit it. Termination without cause within 48 hours of a contractual milestone event shall trigger immediate disbursement of any pending bonuses, retention payouts, or accrued milestone compensations in full. Failure to render payment in full by the original milestone deadline shall result in a liquidated damages penalty totaling 3x the owed amount, to be paid within 30 calendar days, non-negotiable, without need for arbitration, per Section 72DC. Signed, dated, sealed with initials, no escape hatch, no discretionary language, just law, dressed in quiet fonts. I leaned back and stared at the clause like an old friend. This wasn't about revenge. This was insurance, the kind no one ever reads until the house is already on fire. I drafted a new email. To Helen Morales, Lead Counsel. CC legalfulbrightridge.gov. Subject, Clause 72D. Body. Please confirm Clause 72D remains active under the terms of my 2020 Executive Renewal Agreement. No fluff, no explanation. I attached one file. The page itself, signed and time-stamped. Then I hit send. I didn't need to follow up. I knew Helen. She was sharp, one of the few people in that place who understood where the real levers were hidden. And if she hadn't read 72D before, she was about to know it by heart. I closed the laptop. Then I opened the fridge, grabbed leftover pad thai, and sat on the couch. Outside, the world kept moving like nothing had happened. A dog barked next door. My neighbor started his truck. Inside, the countdown had begun. Not for me, for them. Because they thought they'd removed me from the board. What they actually did was activate the queen. Helen Morales was 6 bites into a wilted spinach salad when the email landed. The subject line barely registered. Probably another vague severance gripe or someone asking about Cobra coverage. She clicked anyway, more out of obligation than interest, already preparing to flag it for her junior associate to triage later. Then she saw the attachment. A contract PDF with metadata stamped December 2020, page 39, clause 72D. At first she skimmed it. Standard milestone language, retention bonus terms. She almost closed the tab until her eyes hit the phrase, trigger immediate disbursement, triple liquidated damages if unpaid. Her fork paused in midair. She scrolled back up, read it again, slower this time. Clause 72 die C, non-negotiable, without need for arbitration, enforceable at time of breach regardless of severance status. Helen leaned forward, salad forgotten, and enlarged the signature box. Sure enough, initials, date stamps, fully executed, valid. She exhaled, once, then picked up her phone and hit the internal directory shortcut for Craig Feldon, CEO. He picked up after 2 rings. Yeah? It's Helen. Quick question. Did Brian Colfax authorize the termination of... She glanced back at the email. Natalie Raines, today? A pause. Then Craig's voice, already annoyed. Yeah, this morning. Why? Helen took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. Brian, tell me you already paid her. What? Tell me, she said slowly, her voice flattening, that you paid Natalie her retention bonus before you terminated her employment. Another silence. Then, no. Why would we do that? Brian said she was being redundant, that she was just... Helen didn't wait for him to finish. She turned to her laptop and began typing. Fast, eyes sharp now. Then we have a problem. A $12 million problem. And if we don't fix it before midnight, it becomes a $36 million breach. Craig's tone shifted. Come on, that can't be right. She updated her contract in 2020 during the procurement overhaul, and you let her walk, less than 14 hours before the bonus deadline. Craig swore under his breath. Helen stood up, already waving for her paralegal outside the glass door. I need a full termination packet, right now. Pull HR's logs, get finance on a line, and freeze discretionary spending over $2 million. If you miss this window, it escalates into enforceable damages and opens the company to federal breach exposure. He was still sputtering. She continued. If this goes to court, we'll lose. If this hits the investors, we'll bleed. And if she forwards this to the procurement office that just signed our $190 million renewal, Craig, they'll drop us like a diseased subcontractor. She heard him sit down. Where's Brian now? I don't know, she snapped. But find him, and for God's sake, stop him from firing anyone else. She ended the call, turned to her assistant, and said just 2 words. Code white. Emails were already flying. Legal. HR, board liaisons, PR, but it was too late. The first domino had fallen, and it hadn't come from a whistleblower or a leak. It came from a woman they'd all forgotten to fear. The one who'd written the rulebook and waited. By 10:42 a.m., Fulbright Ridge was vibrating, not literally, but in that specific corporate frequency where panic moves faster than memos. Conference Room 4C, usually reserved for dull budget reviews, became the eye of the storm. Helen Morales stood at the head of the table, jaw set, hair pulled tight into a bun like she knew wind was coming. Legal was there. Finance. A few board reps looped in over video, faces grainy but grim. HR looked like they'd walked into a courtroom wearing floaties. We're calling this meeting to address an urgent compliance risk triggered by a termination this morning. Helen began. Calm. Brutal. HR's director, Paula, cleared her throat. We acted under guidance that the role was being phased out. It was procedural. Helen held up a hand. You terminated Natalie Raines less than 14 hours before a milestone clause triggered a $4 million retention bonus. Paula blinked. There was no intent to... Intent doesn't matter. Helen cut in. Clause 72D doesn't require intent. It just requires a clock. And you hit it. Finance's VP leaned forward. Can we reverse the termination? Retroactively? Helen didn't blink. Not without admitting fault. And once that admission's on record, the clause is triggered twice. Once for wrongful termination, once for bad faith withholding. Silence. A board member's voice crackled through the speaker. What's the exposure? Helen didn't flinch. $12 million, due before 11:59 p.m. tonight. If unpaid by deadline per the contract, triple penalty, $36 million, no arbitration, fully enforceable. The room cracked open. Finance muttered something about Q4 liquidity buffers. Another board member whispered to someone off camera. Paula turned ghost white. But... She's not mission critical, HR stammered. Brian said, Helen turned sharply. Brian is not counsel. Brian is not authorized to terminate executives within a retention window. And Brian is currently not answering his goddamn phone. One of the directors tried to pivot. What does she want? Helen folded her arms. She hasn't asked for anything. That's the problem. Back at home, I was in my reading chair with my phone silenced and my contract printed beside me like a trophy. I knew the stage they were in, confusion giving way to calculation. I pictured Helen laying out the clause like a blade on a conference table. I imagined the panic as they realized it wasn't just about the money. It was the optics. You don't fire your lead procurement architect the day before a $190 million renewal bonus and then forget to pay her. That's not a mistake. That's a press release waiting to happen. And the board knew it. Helen's voice dropped to that low, surgical calm she reserved for a disaster containment. If word gets out that we tried to avoid payout by terminating a key contract architect under a milestone clause, every federal procurement officer we work with will smell it. That renewal? That 190 hours, it's not finalized. One phone call and they'll suspend pending obligations. The board member over video swore. We can't afford that. No, Helen said. You can't. Another silence. Then, what are our options? Helen sighed. There's only one. Pay her. All of it. Before midnight. And just like that, the tide turned. It wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a countdown, and I was already watching the clock. At 2:17 p.m., my phone buzzed. One new email, forwarded by someone inside. No subject line, just a PDF attachment titled Internal Memo, Payment Authorization Freeze. I opened it. It was short. 4 lines. Effective immediately, all outgoing transfers exceeding $2,000 will require full board review and unanimous sign-off. This includes discretionary bonuses, executive incentives, and contractual milestone payments. This measure is temporary and intended to maintain liquidity until Q1 projections are finalized. In other words, they were trying to stall, buy time, delay the inevitable without technically refusing payment. A classic maneuver from the panic playbook: lock the vault and pray the storm passes before the lock's questioned. I smiled. I clicked Reply All. Then I typed one sentence: per clause 72 DC, delay beyond 11:59 p.m. results in triple penalty, non-negotiable. No greeting, no explanation. No threat. I hit send and closed the laptop. There was nothing more to say. The contract would speak louder than I ever could. I went to the kitchen, made a sandwich, sat on the porch while the sun dipped below the edge of my neighbor's roof. Dogs barked. A lawnmower growled somewhere down the street. Normal. Ordinary. While Fulbright Ridge tore itself apart in a boardroom that suddenly realized what it meant to ignore the fine print. Back inside, they were probably pacing. HR wondering if they could reinterpret the clause. Finance calculating tax penalties on a midnight payout. Legal rereading the PDF for loopholes that didn't exist. The thing they still didn't understand was this. I hadn't trapped them. They'd signed it. They'd ratified it. They'd tucked it neatly into the margins and never looked again. I didn't scream when they fired me. I didn't plead. I just walked out like I knew something they didn't, which I did. And now they knew it too. At 3:42 p.m., another email came in from Helen. Just 4 words. Acknowledged. Pending board escalation. I didn't reply because there was nothing left to clarify. They had 9 hours left, and every second that ticked by wasn't mine to stress over. It was theirs. By 4:20 p.m., Fulbright Ridge was in full containment mode. PR was pulled into a side room with a whiteboard already half covered in damage scenarios. Legacy clause, misinterpretation, clerical oversight, employee miscommunication. None of them would hold. They were rehearsing spin while the fuse burned down. Investor Relations sent out an internal Q&A guide marked confidential, do not distribute. It was 3 pages of nothing. Assurances, vague timelines, and phrases like active executive negotiations that might have sounded responsible if anyone outside hadn't already seen the financial freeze memo. But they had. Someone had leaked it. By 4:43, 2 board observers were pinging the CEO asking if the memo was real. By 5:02, one of the procurement compliance officers for the Air Logistics Command had forwarded a clipped paragraph to their government liaison with a single note. Concern? Inside the executive suite, it was carnage behind a thin veneer of business casual. Craig Feldon, CEO, looked like he'd aged 6 years in 6 hours. His tie was off. His phone was on speaker. "Where the hell is Brian?" he barked to no one in particular. "On a flight," someone muttered. Craig slammed his hand on the table. "You mean to tell me he fired our senior contract architect a day before her bonus was due, and then left the coast?" From the side of the room, Helen Morales finally spoke. "Correction," she said, her voice flat as a scalpel. "He fired him, and he didn't just fire our senior contract architect. He fired the author of the entire procurement framework behind our $190 million federal renewal." The room went still. Craig blinked. "What are you talking about?" Helen folded her arms. Clause 3B of the renewal application. You remember that language? The competitive exclusivity model? The one that beat out Navenco and Clearfield? He wrote it. Natalie, the person you let Brian remove without even asking legal. "He said she wasn't essential," Craig muttered, weak. Helen didn't even blink. She was the renewal. She was the reason we got the deal. And now she holds the one clause in her personal contract that could bankrupt us by tomorrow morning. A long pause. Then one of the board members spoke, voice crackling through the speaker. "How in God's name did we miss this?" Helen's lips tightened. "Because you were all too busy chasing fresh thinking to read what was already holding the roof up." Someone cursed. Someone else started whispering to a lawyer just off camera. Another board member leaned forward. "Can we talk to her? See what she wants?" "She already told us," Helen said, holding up her phone. One sentence, quoted the clause. No demand, no negotiation. Just a clock. "And if we don't pay it?" Helen looked directly at Craig. "Then she triples it. And if she forwards the breach to federal procurement, our reputation tanks. And I mean tanks. We won't be eligible for renewals for at least 2 years, maybe more." Silence. Then, finally, Craig whispered what no one else wanted to say. "We need to pay her." And just like that, the narrative flipped. No more spin, no more Brian, no more pretending I was invisible. I hadn't demanded recognition. I didn't show up to meetings and pound my chest. But I'd written the language that built the company's future. And now they knew. Too late, but loud. The clock on my phone glowed 11:57 p.m. I was sitting at my dining table, contract open beside me like scripture, sipping a glass of the good bourbon, the one I'd been saving for a moment that felt earned. Not a promotion, not an award, a reckoning. 2 minutes to go. The house was silent. No pings, no emails, no Slack messages from flailing interns asking where the bid templates lived. Just the rhythmic tick of a kitchen clock and the low hum of inevitability. Then the phone rang. Not unknown, not blocked. It said, "Craig Feldon, direct." I let it buzz twice before answering. "Hello, Craig." He didn't bother with pleasantries. "We'll pay." I let the silence hang for a beat. "We'll wire the full amount immediately," he continued, voice tight. "You'll have confirmation in under a minute." I took another sip of bourbon. "You win," he added, like it tasted like poison coming out of his mouth. My laptop pinged. One new notification. I didn't even open it right away, just glance at the corner of the screen. Incoming wire transfer, $12,000 USD, initiated 11:58:21 p.m., completed 11:58:22 p.m., 38 seconds to spare. I held the phone to my ear, leaned back in the chair, and let my voice stay calm. "Next time, Craig," I said, "read what you sign." Then I hung up. No gloating, no follow-up. Just the final click of a chess piece falling into place. I closed the laptop, exhaled once, and looked toward the hallway. I already knew what I'd see. The photo had come earlier that evening, forwarded by a friend still inside. A dimly lit snapshot of Brian's office, door wide open, chair empty, nameplate gone, no note, no boxes, just absence. The same silence he'd expected from me. They thought I was just a line item, a legacy headcount, dead weight in a new era of buzzwords and bravado. But I was the architecture, the keystone. And while they were busy posing for shareholder slides and preaching agility, I was writing the clause that would outlive them all. $12 million said so. But more than that, it was never about the money. It was about being erased and proving in the quietest, most surgical way possible that I was written into the foundation. And now, Finally, I was free.